Good day, everyone. I am Jayan Enriquez. Today, I am going to discuss the development of children's literature during the 18th century, and as well, I am going to mention the important events that happened in years 1720, 1744, and 1762. So, in 1720, in the year of 1720, Isaac Watts' collection of divine and moral songs for children was first published in 1715. For the next 150 years, it was one of the most popular children's books, typical of the kind of verse directed at children at this time. Unlike the fanciful and imaginative stories, rhymes, and proverbs found in cheap 18th century chapbooks. These books were aimed at a polite middle-class readership and provided lessons on how children should behave and understand the world. Watts' poems, like others of their kind, simplified the complexities of ethical, religious, and social issues, condensing them into packaged didactic instruction. So, in 1744, printer and publisher John Newbery of Sightlink of London announced the availability of a little pretty pocket book intended for the amusement of little Master Tommy and pretty Miss Polly, with two letters from Jack the Giant Killer of Sightlink by M.F. Thwaite and John Newbery. So, the first editions appears to be known only from an advertisement in the Penny London Morning Advertiser published on June 18, 1744. If copies were issued at that time, they appear to have been read out of existence. This small book, of which very few copies of early editions survive, is generally considered the first book for children in the modern sense. It consists of simple rhymes for each of the letters of the alphabet. To market the book to the children of the day, the book could be purchased alone for 6D, or with a ball for boys, or a pincushion for girls at a cost of 8D. Jean-Jacques Rousseau in 1712 to 1778 has had a significant influence on thinking about childhood and education from the later 18th century until the present. Rousseau work Emile, or on Education 1762, is concerned, like all of his major writings and like those of many of his Enlightenment contemporaries, with an inquiry into the notion of progress and the perfectibility of humankind. In Emile, Rousseau argues that the spread of civilization has not made human society more perfect, but has instead corrupted it. Emile poses as a treatise laying out a scheme for a new form of natural education designed both to shield children from this corruption and to prepare them for their inevitable entry into the social realm where it prevails. Instead of resolving this contradiction by providing a tidy pedagogical formula, however, Emile asked to be read ironically, such that it reveals the ideal driving much thinking about education, the Enlightenment, and in post-Enlightenment modernity to be unattainable and even a danger. So this time, I am going to discuss the development of children's literature at the end of the 18th century. So, by the end of the 18th century, children's literature was a flourishing, separate, and secure part of the publishing industry in Britain. Perhaps as many as 50 children's books were being printed each year, mostly in London, but also in regional centers such as Edinburgh, Oxford, York, and Newcastle. By today's standards, these books can seem pretty dry and they were often very moralizing and pious, but the books were clearly meant to please their readers, whether with entertaining stories and appealing characters, the pleasant tone of the writing, or attractive illustrations and eye-catching page layouts and bindings. 200 years ago, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm published a collection of tales that would become one of the most influential works of folklore in Germany, Europe, and eventually the world. Between 1812 and 1857, seven editions of their tales appeared, each one different from the last until the final. Best known version barely resembled the first, given that the first edition has recently been honored in bicentenary celebrations throughout the world. It is perhaps a good time to re-examine what we think we know about the original tales of the Brothers Grimm. The stories the Brothers Grimm first collected are brusque, blunt, absurd, comical, and tragic, and are not, strictly speaking, fairy tales. In fact, the Grimms never intended the tales to be read by children. The tales are about children and families and how they reacted to the difficult conditions under which they live. The Grimms thought the stories and their morals emanated naturally from the German people in an oral tradition, and they wanted to preserve them before the tales were lost forever. In gathering the tales, the Grimms made a unique contribution to folklore, and their Kinder und Hausmärchen, children and household tales, it was in large part their first edition, published in two volumes in 1812 and 1815, that inspired folklorists in Europe and Great Britain to gather tales from their oral traditions to preserve as part of their cultural heritage. For just over a century, from 1827 to 1929, a monthly periodical called The Youth's Companion dispensed moral education, information, and fiction to generations of young people. By 1885, the periodical was claiming 385,000 copies were printed each week, making it the most widely circulated journal of its day, largely due to the premiums and prices it offered for new subscriptions. The Youth's Companion was founded in Boston in 1827 by Nathaniel Willis and Asa ran as a Sunday school organ in the tradition of Boston Congregationalism, one that would warn against the ways of transgression, error, and ruin, and allure to those of virtue and pity. The classic children's bedtime prayer, Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, appeared in its first issue. Rand left the venture after 3 years, and Willis remained as editor until he sold the paper in 1857 to John W. Olmsted and Daniel Sharp Ford. Ford, who was known to his readers as Perry Mason, after the name he gave to his business, remained as editor until his death in 1899. During his editorship, he completely revamped its content and format, making the Youth's Companion into a well-respected publication of high literary merit. By publishing serial and scientific articles and puzzles, by soliciting articles from readers, and by including contributions from notable writers such as Harriet Beecher Stowe, Rudyard Kipling, Thomas Hardy, and Jack London, Ford was able to increase the circulation tenfold within a decade and to nearly 500,000 by 1899. The Grimm brothers published many folk tales at the beginning of the 19th century, although not expressly for children. The Grimm's tales are considered to be the most famous of all fairy tales collections. The magazine survived until it finally folded at the onset of the Great Depression, when it merged with American Boy, a victim of financial woes and changing tastes. So, in 1835, the first volume of Hans Christian Andersen Fairy Tales Told for Children, was published. So it was quickly followed by two additional volumes in 1836 and 1837. While many of the fairy tales in their first volume had roots in Danish folklore and legend. So in the additional volumes, Andersen drew more broadly from other European folk traditions of countries like France and Germany. At the time of their publication, Andersen was still known in Denmark as a novelist and playwright, and continued to write in these veins in the years after publishing his fairy tales. Those who read the tales found them innovative, not only for their use of idioms and spoken language, but also for their literary complexity. Andersen's books greatly appealed to both adults and children. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, widely beloved British children's book by Lewis Carroll, published in 1865. With its fantastical tales and riddles, it became one of the most popular works of English language fiction. It was notably illustrated by British artist John Tenniel. By the end of the 19th century, Alice, taking the two volumes together, had become the most popular children's book in England. And within 2 more decades, it was among the most popular storybooks in the world. It inspired numerous films, theatrical performances, and ballets, as well as countless works of scholarly analysis. The Baby's Opera, a book of old rhymes with new dresses, was originally published in 1877. It contains the music for many English nursery songs and is one of the Crane's best-known toy books. The work is accompanied throughout by a series of dazzling color illustrations by Walter Crane himself. The Diverting History of John Gilpin is a comic ballad by William Cowper about John Gilpin, written in 1782. The ballad concerns a draper called John Gilpin who rides a runaway horse. Cowper heard the story from Lady Anna Austen at a time of severe depression, and it cheered him up so much that he put it into verse. The poem was published anonymously in the Public Advertiser in 1782 and then published with the Task in 1785. It was very popular to the extent that pirate copies were being sold all across the country together with Gilpin books and toys. The poem was republished in 1878, illustrated by Randolph Caldecott and printed by Edmund Evans. Caldecott's image of Gilpin riding the horse is the basis for the design of the obverse of the Caldecott medal. Kate Greenaway in 1846 to 1901, is one of the most popular children's book illustrators of all time. Edmund Evans produced her first book in 1879, which sold out, resulting in triumph and gaining runaway her reputation. She has enchanted people, young and old, for over 100 years with her watercolor illustrations of sweet, charming 18th century children with their quaint costumes and idyllic scenes. This book, The Pied Piper of Hamelin, written by Robert Browning and illustrated by Kate Greenaway, was originally published in 1888. Many of the earliest children's books, particularly those dating back to the 1900s and before, are now extremely scarce and increasingly expensive. Book press are working to republish these classic works in affordable, high-quality color editions using the original text and artworks, so these works can delight another generation of children.